סביבון, סוף סוף סוף, חנוכה הוא חג טוב, חנוכה הוא חג טוב, סביבון, סוף סוף סוף, חג שמחה הוא לעם, נס גדול היה שם, נס גדול היה שם, חג שמחה הוא לעם.
Hello and welcome to TBI's Share the Light podcast series. I am Jody Sanders, a lay leader here at TBI. I have no qualifications whatsoever to lead religious life here. I am Jewish and I was willing to participate in these podcasts. We are grateful to the Multicultural Affairs team of Victoria Department of Premier and Cabinet who approved a grant that is allowing us to produce these podcasts, Share the Light, the Jewish Festival of Hanukkah, with all of you listeners and watchers out there. Today, our guest is Cantor Michel Lalum. Michel has been part of the TBI congregation for 30 plus years, and he is one of only 2 qualified cantors employed in Australia. Welcome, Michel.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Really glad. Now, to start really basic for our listeners, what is a cantor?
Yes, we get this question quite a bit because the difficulty is we can be all sorts of different things. One is obviously from the Italian cantare, to sing. So we are the primary liturgist, we are the singers within the congregation, which means we lead the services. So whatever it might be, whatever kind of service you may be listening to or participating in, we lead the liturgy. But of course we do a great deal more than that throughout the day and throughout the week. But the key element is that we lead the musical components and most of the liturgy throughout the services.
And there's a beautiful song that you sang in our intro. What was that song?
Yeah, so one of the traditional, there's a few key songs that you'll know which are associated with Hanukkah. One of them talks about the spinning top, the dreidel in Yiddish or the sevivon in Hebrew, and it talks about how it spins.
That's beautiful. And so what were you actually saying in Hebrew?
Chag Simcha Hu La'am, this is a festival for all of the people. Nes Gadol Hayasham, there was a great miracle that occurred there. And so we spin the dreidel as a memory of this.
That's gorgeous, gorgeous. Now, how did you become a cantor?
So becoming a cantor is interesting because you come to it with a love of Judaism, a love of music, and somehow you combine the two, or the different threads or different aspects of the things that actually get us excited. And so for me, it was taking a background in music, a music degree, and taking also the background in Judaism that I had grown up with and then gone and studied, and wanting to combine them. And first I was here as a cantorial soloist who is someone who just sings, and then I developed that and explored and started teaching children, started teaching in the religious school, and after a few years I actually went off to cantorial school, so I spent 5 years in cantorial school.
5 years, wow.
Yeah, so it's quite a commitment to become qualified. And then having done all that, you then begin your career in the cantorate, exploring all of the areas of interest that you might have. Music is obviously one of those, and liturgy is obviously one of those, but there are a whole bunch of other dimensions to the cantorate. Pastoral care might be one of them, so religious life is one of them, obviously, but a huge part of my portfolio here is pastoral care and looking after anyone who is unwell, anyone who's elderly in the community, anyone who's isolated in the community, and most of the time that has not a great deal to do with singing.
So if you were to think about how you spend a typical day as a cantor here for TBI, what kind of things would you be doing?
I might be teaching. I might be visiting people who might be at home or who might lock-ins who can't come to the synagogue or can't come to the community. I might be doing some kind of talk, which might be an interfaith or inter-community discussions. They might be within the Jewish community with other denominations. They might be within the larger Australian community. I might be, for example, at the Interfaith Network in the Glen Eira Council. I sit on one of the committees there. There's all sorts of things that I might be doing, and that actually takes up 95% of the time, and about 5% of my time is spent on music.
And singing.
Yeah.
And when you think about music just in general. What role do you think music actually plays in Judaism, both in everyday practice and in holiday times?
So it's actually key. Anyone who comes to a service, whether it's in Judaism or in any other religion, they're going to walk out with two things on their minds. Was the music beautiful? Could I participate? Was it engaging? Was I involved in it? Did I enjoy it? That's one component. And was the sermon interesting or challenging or innovative? Did it stimulate me in different ways? Those are the two key pieces. And liturgically, as far as the prayer, the experience of prayer, of spirituality, it is carried by the music. So the music can create an atmosphere of joy, of festivity. It can create an atmosphere of reflection, of sadness, something that you might have for a funeral, something that you might have for a celebration. And you would obviously choose the music to reflect the mood and choose the liturgical settings to reflect the mood of the service, the time of year, the time of the day, whatever it might be that you're trying to express.
So is Jewish music, for our non-Jewish listeners and watchers, is Jewish music the same throughout the week and at holidays? Is it different at times? You mentioned funerals. It can sound a bit more somber. Talk a little bit about what music sounds like at different times of the week even.
Okay, so yes, in a traditional context where people are very, very familiar, so historically when they really knew all of the ins and outs of the musical modes, you could know what time of the week or Shabbat or festival and what part of the service just by the sounds that you would hear. So if you were sufficiently attuned to it, you would recognize it. Nowadays that's become less the case because of our auditory palette is not quite as sophisticated as it might have been at one time. But I will give you an example. So if you are at Hanukkah and you are approaching Hanukkah, so the month that precedes the month of Kislev, which precedes Hanukkah, you might hear Mi Chamocha, which is a piece of our liturgy about redemption, sung to the theme melody of Hanukkah, which goes like this. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, which is the melody of Maot Tzur. So the same piece of liturgy just before the high holidays would be sung to Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, which is Leshana Tova Tikatevu, which reflects that we are at the new year. So the melody reflects the season. So if we're at Shavuot, it would be Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. So each of these reflects that it is the festival, or it is Shabbat, or it's the evening, or it's the morning, or it's a weekday. And if you're familiar with these melodies, you will immediately know what time of the year or even what part of the service you're in according to the melodies.
Gee, that's so interesting. And when we think about, so you talk about the different festivals, you also mentioned Shabbat. Perhaps also for our non-Jewish listeners, can you explain what Shabbat is, or in English, the Sabbath, and what our Shabbat or Sabbath means to us, and what role music plays in that?
Sure. So long as we've got a couple of hours, we can cover this subject with no problem whatsoever.
Maybe the shortened
In a nutshell.
version.
Yeah. In a nutshell, well, Shabbat is a day of rest. So theoretically, if you look at the biblical narrative, the first 6 days of creation, God creates heaven and earth. And somewhere along that creation cycle, the sun and the moon, so we know that they weren't 24-hour cycles, so we can include all of evolution in the first few days of creation, if you wish. But ultimately, after the 6 days of creation, on the seventh day, God rested. And so this is a very, very early day of rest. I think we all appreciate our weekends, and where would we be without a pause in our day, in our life, in our week, in our year? We are refreshed. We are able to tackle the next week or the next month or the next year with a certain amount of energy and vigor. And Shabbat gives us that. And so just as God rested on the seventh day, so too we are required in Jewish law or invited to participate in this day of rest. And it can be a really beautiful thing to turn our phones off, to turn our computers off, to turn all of the external things that are distracting us off and spend a little bit of time together in prayer, in celebration, with lots of food, because that's always key.
Exactly.
But most importantly, with family.
And of course, we welcome Shabbat at sundown on Friday night. And in the last 10 months, the computer has actually been a great help to us
Yes.
at Shabbat to welcome us into services and to share and to sing.
Yes.
Are there special songs that are sung on Shabbat for this day of rest to
Sure,
welcome
absolutely.
that in?
Absolutely. So the reason why we start in the evening is because if you think back again to the biblical narrative in Genesis, it says it was evening, it was morning. So the day starts with the evening, because we didn't have watches 3,500 years ago. So the way you calculated a day was when it was dusk. So that was the beginning of the next day. So it was evening starts the next day in Jewish tradition. And so therefore the Sabbath starts on Friday night. And yes, there are all sorts of melodies which are associated specifically to Shabbat, specifically a group of psalms where we welcome in the Sabbath, and we welcome in the concept of Sabbath as a bride, and we dress the table with a white tablecloth, and we create an atmosphere of rejoicing, an atmosphere of celebration, and the music will reflect that. So some of the pieces which are from the Psalms, or Lecha Dodi, which welcomes, it's a mystical piece talking about the Sabbath
favorite.
bride, and there must be 150 different compositions to this poem, this acrostic poem, is all about how do we celebrate Shabbat, how do we bring in Shabbat, how do we express Shabbat from within ourselves and share it with our families and our friends.
Beautiful. So if you had I understand that you've had the opportunity to live in other places around the world besides Australia. Share with us just some of the places that you've had a chance to live.
Okay, so look, every Jew has got a story. We've all been refugees in different ways. My father was born in Algeria. My mother was born in Poland. My brother was born in Israel. I was born in Belgium. I arrived here at the age of 4. I grew up in Australia. And when I was 17, I went and lived overseas for 3 years. Then came back, did 2 degrees here in Australia. And then I studied for 5 years in New York. Lived there for 7 years, did cantorial and afterwards rabbinic studies, and then lived for 5 years in France. So I've lived 5 years in Israel, 5 years in France, 7 years in America, 4 years in Belgium, and the rest here in Australia.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Truly a polyglot.
And so if you were to talk about Jewish culture in all of those different places, how would you say, for example, Jewish culture is different in France than it is here in Australia, or any of the other places that you've lived?
Okay, it's actually quite dramatically different. There are some key elements that are common around the world, and one of the comforting things is that wherever you go in the world, you'll find, if you go to a synagogue, the liturgy has got the common element of the Hebrew. And often in the East European or Ashkenazi world, which includes most of Europe and America and Australia, the melodies will be influenced by an Eastern European sound. And if you go to a synagogue in France or in America or in Germany or in England, you're likely to hear quite similar musical renditions of the liturgy. And that is very comforting when you're traveling internationally and you're finding yourself in a place where you might not have the commonality of language, and yet you can attend a synagogue and follow the service, follow the liturgy. So that's one component. There are differences though. So for example, North African Jewry is dramatically different. The music is dramatically different, unrecognizably so. The language is still the same. So it's still the same words, whether you're in Algeria, where my father was born, whether you're in Morocco or Yemen, wherever it might be, it's still the same words, and yet the melodies are completely different and reflect a historical separation which occurred when at different times in history, the Jews were expelled from Israel, and some went to Europe and others went to North Africa. And they were influenced by the music of the countries and by the cultures and the musical palette that was surrounding them at the time. So if you listen to the music of North Africa, of Algeria, for example, my father's musical tastes are very much influenced by Arabic music.
Right.
And my mother, who's Polish, can't stand it. And my father, when he hears Yiddish folk songs, he's like, that's nice, but he has no connection to that whatsoever.
Whereas your mother would.
That's right. So there's a connection that might be the Yiddish language of Eastern Europe versus the Ladino language, which is the Spanish influence. So it's Spanish with a little bit of Hebrew in it, or Judeo-Arabic. And that's the language that my father grew up with. And for example, on Pesach, I can sing a piece which I memorized from my father's tradition, and it goes like this. وجيكتشو وشروب الماء صفاتنا لحركة اللتا لقربة القلبة لقربة القلتا نكلش جدي لشرلي بيبي بخاروبشي خاروبشي واحد جدي لكشرلي بيبي بخاروبشي خاروبشي. And it's a song about Shnei Zuzim, these two goats. And we know it in Hebrew. So on Pesach, for example, on Passover, in my family, we would sing it in Yiddish. With my mother, we would sing it in French because we had a French Haggadah. We would sing it in Hebrew, obviously. We would sing it in Aramaic and in Judeo-Arabic because that was the language of my father.
Amazing. And a Haggadah?
Haggadah is the liturgical prayer book that is used through the service that is around a Passover meal.
Amazing. And you talk about France too. So having lived in France, now were you a cantor while you were there, or?
I was actually the rabbi of a community in France, in Lyon, for 5 years, and in that community, it was predominantly Sephardi, so it was predominantly North African influenced. It was a progressive community, so what was interesting there is France has the third or the fourth largest Jewish population in the world.
Wow.
After Israel, and America, and the third and fourth are the former Soviet Union and France. So somewhere between 550 and 750,000 Jews live in France. And predominantly they are the Jews of North Africa, so of places like Algeria, Morocco, the French-speaking countries, so the French colonies, who moved and migrated from those countries after there was a significant amount of persecution. And so they ended up migrating from those countries to France, where they were welcomed and have had relatively good, successful lives. And that is the frontier of Judaism today. Where there are so many Jews who are exploring their Judaism, often quite disenfranchised and unfamiliar with the Judaism, completely integrated into French society, and yet thirsting for an opportunity to explore Judaism in a modern setting. So that was a fantastic opportunity in Lyon in France, and of course traveling around France and also visiting family was an opportunity to share a little bit of Judaism that is enriched from all of the different environments around the world that I've experienced, and bringing that to France.
I think that's so fascinating, you know, particularly for people here in Australia to hear the different cultural aspects that influence Judaism, and that even though the practice and prayers are the same all over the world, the actual influences of different culture, multiculturalism, actually creates different sounds and different, well, foods and practices, and we'll even talk a little bit about foods and things a little bit later, but I'll wait to ask you
But if
those
I can,
questions.
there's
Please.
another example. So in the Eastern European influenced Ashkenazi world, one of what's called the Misinai tune, so a melody which theoretically was given to the Jews at Mount Sinai, is the melody of Kol Nidre. And everyone might be familiar with the Bruch Kol Nidre. The melody is Kol Nidre Vesare Vacharame Vekoname, probably the most famous of texts. And yet if you go to a North African congregation, so what is called a Sephardi congregation, they don't know that melody at all. So clearly it wasn't given at Sinai. but it's so old and so entrenched in the Eastern European traditional context, the Ashkenazi context, that it is considered as if it was given at Sinai.
It's amazing. That is actually, so a personal note, the very first thing I ever heard you sing was that at a Yom Kippur service. So that's where that, of course, is sung. And my children were sitting next to me, and I cried through the whole thing because I thought that you sounded so beautiful. So it was a treat even just getting to hear it again now.
Right, I have a
So-
box of tissues. If you need.
Thanks for that. Anyway, I'm a little bit of a fan. That's all I can say, Michelle. And so when you talk about music, though, and you know, as a cantor, you have a love for music. You mentioned that earlier, that combining that and your love for Judaism is what led you down this path. What other music do you like?
Classical music is my greatest love. That's where I came from originally, operatic specifically. So I'm loving the fact that the Metropolitan Opera is online every day, and you can see a new opera every day. And my children come and sit in my lap, and my two and a half year old daughter can quote Peter and the Wolf and the orchestral accompaniment and sing you the melodies of each of the different characters. So yes, I bring that love of music, and I bring that music to what we do also in the synagogue. So we have all sorts of concerts and opportunities to enjoy music in all its different. It's so diverse. You can have folk music, you can have great classics, you can have the music of my father's tradition in Judeo-Arabic or the Sephardi influence or the Ashkenazi influence. And the more the better. The different influences enrich us all and are really a delight.
That's beautiful. And again, for our non-Jewish listeners, maybe just explain just really clearly what Ashkenazic and Sephardic is. I don't want to assume that anyone knows.
So Ashkenazi means Eastern European influences. So the most famous musical impact would be klezmer music, which would be strongly influenced by the gypsy music of Romania, for example, or Eastern Europe. So Yiddish language is basically a German dialect, 75% German, 20% Hebrew, and 5% whatever other language. And the music influence would be Eastern European. Sephardi influence is either Spanish or North African, so Algeria, Morocco, Turkey, Yemen, etc., all those different countries, and they are influenced by Arabic music or by Latin American music, Spanish music, etc. So you have a very, very different influence between both the languages and the musical styles. So klezmer is completely different, for example, the gypsy sound and modes, to the Arabic influence, which has quarter tones. So the oud and other instruments which give you the quarter tones, which are anathema to Eastern European musical styles.
It's fascinating. And you know, when we think about prayer sung differently around the world, if you were to talk about a prayer that was sung the same, would there be anything that's sung the same around the world, or is everything a bit different?
There is not a lot that would be across all of the different communities. The few things are actually with the creation of the State of Israel. Israel became the gathering point for Jews from around the world. So something like Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati, which is the theme song for Hanukkah, which is forthcoming, which is our festival of light. That's why we're here today. The theme song Ma'oz Tzur became universal. So that is sung in the Sephardi world as well as the Ashkenazi world, even though it was originally an influence from the Ashkenazi world. But there are other songs, for example, that have gone the other way. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nivra. Adon Olam came from the Sephardi world into the Ashkenazi world. So there are melodies that have gone both ways.
I didn't know that. I love that song.
Yeah, and they've gone, mainly that's gone through Israel.
Right.
So one of those, whether it's North African or Eastern European, has brought that melody to Israel, where it has flourished in all the communities, across communities, and then it's been taken out from there around the world to other communities. And it's not uncommon, for example, Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu was historically a drinking song in
Really?
in bars, in pubs, and someone heard it and took it, and we can actually see what the original song was and how it then became used in a liturgical setting for a poem extolling God's praise, and then after that became part of the liturgy. And there's other examples, including examples which were rather raunchy songs from apparently North African brothels.
Really?
and became, which of course no one admits to ever having attended, but somehow the music transitioned from being something which was as secular and mundane as you could possibly imagine to something which was then used as a melody for a song extolling God's praise, and then into the liturgy, which most people have no idea where the melody comes from, and perhaps it's just as well as they don't.
Yeah.
But they celebrated that melody as
Hey,
it
that's
transitioned.
that brothel song we were
Yes,
singing.
Yes, that's right.
It's great. Fantastic. Well, that brings us to the segment now where we are asking all of our guests something I like to call the 8 corny candle questions. So we're going to light it up, and I'm going to ask you the first question for Hanukkah. Growing up, what was your favorite childhood Hanukkah memory?
So Hanukkah in my family was about gathering the family. My father was a traditional Sephardi Jew. My mother swears to God that she's an atheist. There was always a little bit of tension there, and yet we would get together, we'd light the candles, we'd sing some of the songs from my father's tradition, then we'd sing some of the songs from my mother's tradition in Yiddish, even though she's an atheist, a militant atheist. Nevertheless, we would celebrate, and that was part of it. And we would, of course, eat some latkes or some sufganiyot, some donuts. So either what is effectively a Jewish version of a hash brown and some donuts, things boiled in oil.
Yeah.
And the oil is one of the celebrations of Hanukkah. And so those are memories of celebrations where we'd all gather together and bring light. We would light the candles, eat good foods, and be together as a family.
Beautiful. And if you think about your favorite number one Hanukkah food, is it the latke? Is it the donut?
It's
is
the
it something
donut.
else?
It's definitely the donut. Definitely the donut.
And is it the jam donut
No,
too? No, just any
no.
donut.
Just you can do all sorts of things with donuts. You get the donut, and then you have an opportunity for everyone to decorate. Like you give them icing and all sorts of things, and let the kids play, let them enjoy, let them celebrate, and of course explore and get their fingers into the dough. And the more tactile it is, the more different senses we engage, the more it'll be memorable and enjoyable and exciting, and something that will carry them through.
That's exactly right. And if you think about it, there are actually 16 different ways to spell Hanukkah, or at least that's what my research tells me. How do you spell Hanukkah, and why do you think it's spelled differently?
Okay, it's a transliteration. So any transliteration requires us to define it as our ears would work.
Transliteration from Hebrew to English.
Yes, from Hebrew to English, or when I was in France, it was Hebrew to French. They were completely different.
Oh, right, of course.
Completely different. So when I had to create a transliteration of our prayer book, I had to get someone to help me because I didn't know how to transliterate into French in an appropriate way, so someone else would facilitate that. So even though I might spell it Chanukah, other people would put an H with a dot under it to create a guttural ch sound, Chanukah. Or some people would put CKH to try and create a ch sound in a language that doesn't have a guttural sound. So it really doesn't matter. Ultimately, the important thing is that we have the word Hanukkah transliterated into a language so that people can say it.
Yeah. Well, that's right, because I suppose in French, and over the lockdown, that's been my exploits. I've been trying to learn French as a thing, a hobby. So the CH would sound more like a sh sound.
Yeah,
So
sh
you
or
could,
ch,
right.
but it wouldn't be a ch.
So you couldn't spell it that way.
That's right. So they put H with a dot.
Oh, it's great. I learned something that's so cool. Tell us, this is question number 4, about your best dreidel story. So this can be about playing with a dreidel, buying a dreidel, singing about a dreidel.
My favorite dreidel story, it's actually more about I had a children's choir in Connecticut when I had a congregation there, and we had a concert, a Hanukkah Lights event, with 200 kids involved, and having them all singing I had a little dreidel, I made it out of clay. And then they put their hands above their head and they all turn around and they sing, oh, dreidel, 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 I made it. And they're all turning around at spinning top. You know, that to me is people finding the beauty of a festival.
Yes.
And hopefully those kids still remember those dreidel songs and being the dreidel.
Those sort of things, as you said, they carry you through and keep you together. I think that's beautiful. Do you exchange gifts at Hanukkah, or do you have any traditions around this gift exchange?
So yes, we do exchange gifts, so I have on the first night of Hanukkah, my true love gave to me. So we actually share gifts. They're not necessarily gifts of massive substance every night of Hanukkah, but yes, I actually give 8 gifts to each of my family, so much so that my dog has gotten used to unwrapping a Hanukkah treat every night and can tear open gifts to get to the treats. And my kids love, you know, getting Hanukkah gifts and the Hanukkah treats, and they don't have to be expensive. It's all about having a celebration and an opportunity to celebrate. So yes, we do share gifts, even though traditionally it's about the light and playing with a dreidel and perhaps Hanukkah gelt. We actually give little gifts throughout Hanukkah.
And the gelt, of course, is?
So gelt is normally chocolate money. So gold coins, which are actually chocolate covered in gold foil. And that's one of the traditions of Hanukkah that we have. I try to avoid the sugar highs with my kids, and try and emphasize other kinds of gifts that they get to have.
So my family, very similar to yours, will have the 8 gifts, but there'll be one sort of good gift, and the other gifts are all small gifts. Could be socks even, you know, little sort of things, but just something to open each night. And my dog too. I just got a dog this last year. And he's had one Hanukkah, he's got another one coming up.
I have Hanukkah socks,
It's great.
which actually have dreidels. Not wearing them. I should have worn them today. I'll wear them soon.
You can wear them through the rest of the festival. 8 days. We're good that way. Okay, now here's a good one. What is a Jewish holiday or festival, not including Hanukkah, that you enjoy celebrating the most, and why?
Right. Well, actually, I brought a few little show and tell things because
good.
There are different sounds associated with different festivals. Of course, the shofar associated with the high holidays. Shofar,
Fantastic.
ram's horn.
A ram's horn.
Right?
Excellent.
Well, this isn't necessarily a ram, but yes, the shofar associated with Rosh Hashanah, the high holidays. And of course, there's also honey. So you have to remember that we're
nice
dealing, bees, right? So honey also associated with sweetness of the new year. But one of my favorites is actually about Purim, and we know that all Jews look like Yankel here, right? So
Where'd you get that?
a little bag of tricks. So on Purim we have a sound maker
A grogger?
called a grager. For making noise to drown out the name of the evil person, because you can summarize most of the celebrations, most of the Jewish festivals as they tried to kill us, we beat them, let's eat.
Yeah.
Let's eat is the important part of that. But genocide is not something that you can celebrate.
No.
But what do you do when the reality is that some of these festivals are remembering an attempted genocide in Israel or wherever it may have been? So we have various sound makers, and Miriam played with a timbrel. We read a Megillah, and we make sounds on all sorts of instruments, which don't have to be traditional. They can be pretty much anything that you have. So I just happen to bring out a number. By the way, not all of them are in tune.
The Purim ukulele.
Just terrible. But yes, Purim is one of my favorites because you get to remember something which was really serious in history, but you tend to do it in a spoof, in a manner that is humorous. And you remember that while some of the historical experiences might have been really catastrophic at the time in history, we need to find ways to celebrate. And so we do celebrate. We celebrate that we are here. We celebrate that we are in an amazing country with amazing people who have welcomed us to Australia, whether we were born here or not. and that we can celebrate this Festival of Light with everyone here in Australia today. That's just an amazing blessing.
Beautiful, beautiful. And is that why you love Purim? Because of the humor and the spoof and the...
Partially, it's also that we tend to do a performance of the story of Purim, the story of Purim as depicted by various composers. So we've done Les Mis, we've done rock and roll, I've got Billy Joel is coming, but it won't happen next year because of COVID norms. We don't really know what it'll be, but we've done Grease, Broadway, so all sorts of different... Jersey Boys, that's right. We've done all sorts of different depictions, so we would adapt the words to reflect the festival and some of the themes. But it's fun, and people enjoy it, and we modernize it and make it relevant, sometimes including political jokes. And we haven't written what's going to be our Festival of Purim this year, but I don't think there's going to be a lack of jokes this year.
No, that's right. So it's really acting out the play of the story of the Megillah, and we do it in all this sort of musical theater or other influence type ways, and it's really enjoyable. I must say, having participated in what's called the Purim Spiel for the last couple of years, I've really enjoyed that and think it's really fun. And I'm looking forward to Billy Joel.
If you can't laugh, where are you? What are you doing?
That's right,
Yeah,
that's
great.
right. Well, as a New York, New Jersey girl, I always say I'm a Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen sort of girl. So I'm looking forward to Billy. That'd be amazing.
Probably 22.
2022, okay. Well, let's hope so. Now, question number 7. As an outside-looking-in question, if you were to celebrate a holiday or festival from a different religion or culture, what one has interested you, or what one have you already had a chance to share in?
Look, I've shared in so many because as a young musician, I joined all sorts of choirs and sang in all sorts of music in other religious traditions. And to quote one of my Catholic cantor's friends who used to say that he loved his Catholicism for the bells and the smells. And so I've sung many masses, midnight mass, carols by candlelight with Doug Hayward in the bowl. I've sung many different occasions across faiths and denominations and celebrated with other people, whether the specific theology is something that I believe or not, I celebrate with them because ultimately it's the same God by a different name. And some might find that a contentious concept, but to me, ultimately we're all climbing the same mountain to the same source of light. We're just approaching it by different paths. And the thing that's between us, the thing that makes us unaware that we're all climbing the same mountain is the actual mountain. And the mountain is our structured religion. Our blindness is what is actually stopping us from realizing, and we only realize it when we get to the very peak, when we're reaching the light. Then we can see, you were climbing the same mountain, just using a different language or a different verbiage or a different vocabulary, and that vocabulary might come from a different religion. So personally, I've actually visited and participated in the whole annual cycle, including the life cycle events of different religions, celebrated with friends and with families, and enjoyed that because ultimately it's about the humans and their relationship with the same God by whatever name.
I think it's so beautiful to focus on the things that we all have in common as opposed to the things that we have that are different. Sure. And again, find those paths together. It's beautiful. Yep. Oh, it's been an absolute joy speaking to you. I have one more question before we go. What is something the audience doesn't know about Hanukkah that you can share that perhaps we haven't touched on yet?
How to make donuts.
Oh, well, how do you do it?
Well, we get a donut machine.
Oh, yeah, right.
We got a donut machine so we can crank out 500 donuts an hour so that we can keep up with the demand. But no, we actually experimented. One year we decided that we weren't going to buy the donuts, the commercial donuts, because it was costing us an absolute fortune. And we decided we'd experiment with making them. So my wife and I put on a lot of pounds that year, a lot of kilos that year, because we experimented with a whole bunch of different recipes, and we discovered baking donuts works really well. Right. And we tried different ways. So we bought a whole bunch of deep fryers and baking and all sorts of different things to make them, and ultimately came across a donut machine to do this. But ultimately, it's about celebration. Find what works for you. Find what resonates for you. Whether it's playing the dreidel or singing the songs or eating the foods or sharing in the liturgy, whatever it is, find what resonates for you in this festival and share it.
Well, and that's what we're doing, sharing the light. So I have to thank you so much, Cantor Michelle Lallume. And for donuts and the like, join us each night of Hanukkah at 6:15 p.m. as we share the light with candlelighting, music, stories, and more from our community and beyond. And each day of Hanukkah here at TBI, you can also collect free donuts through our donut drive-through. Please swing by and get a donut between 5 and 6 p.m. here at TBI. Thank you again.
Can I wrap it up with a little song? This is a
please.
melody that you will all know,
Okay.
called The 8 Days of Hanukkah. I'll only sing you the 8th day. You'll recognize the melody. On the 8th night of Hanukkah, my true love gave to me 8 Alka-Seltzer, 7 noodle kugels, 6 pickled herrings, 5 bowls of chicken soup, 4 potato latkes, 3 pounds of corned beef, 2 kosher pickles, and lox bagels, and some cream cheese.
Yeah, that sums it up. Thank you. Thank you.
Shalom,
Michelle.
everyone.
Shalom.